something inside you that sounds so familiar. May I remind you? Why is it? Why is it? Come on and tell me. Go on, remind me. Why is it? Why is it? Afraid I'm not hearing it. Why is it? Why is it? Afraid I'm not hearing it. Little like about to chat and sitting and fights for chilling and yeah, found myself sleeping in it. Mountains and mountains and a river flowing down from me. Yeah, when I see it, I don't see it. Hi, yeah, tell me already. Why is it? Why is it? When I see it, I don't see it. Hi. Why is it? Why is it?
Hello, everybody. This is Sam Hillmer. Welcome back to Place of Assembly podcast. For those of you who haven't been here before, this is the podcast where we talk about physical spaces that house creative communities of all kinds, everywhere, all around the world. Place of Assembly is produced by Hollow here in Queens, New York, in partnership with Experimental Sound Studio Chicago and 8-Ball Radio. And this is actually the last of our first series. This is episode 12. We're going to be taking a break in February, getting the next series fired up. It's going to be dope. I'll tell you more about it at the end of the episode. And we'll have other extra things going on at that time. Today, we are blessed to have some dope guests from the middle of America. This is our first time. Oh, no, this is not, because we did an episode on Chicago. Okay. So this is our second time visiting that zone. We're here today with Courtney Finn and Nicole Ledenick of the Museum of Contemporary Art, Cleveland. And Courtney is the chief curator, and Nicole is the curator of education and engagement. And we're going to be talking about museums in COVID times, creative practice in the Midwest, and, you know, chopping it up, getting into it, seeing where it goes. So let's bring them in. I'm doing something a little different today, and we're doing this on Zoom. So bear with me. Okay, here we are. We're back. Okay, Nicole, Courtney, what's up?
Hey, how's it going?
So Courtney, you missed, well, you didn't, you actually were just, I failed to let you in from the waiting room in time. I'm on stage, and I'm looking at you being projected onto the back wall of the stage. So
amazing.
If you're wondering why you're looking at, like, kind of, you know, like, I'm not looking at the computer, that's why. So if you've ever seen the cast before, that's review for you, so apologies already, but let's get it cracking. So what's good in Cleveland?
Yeah, a lot. We're closed, actually. The museum's closed to the public, so speaking of assembly, we're not assembling. We are actually assembling a new season of shows, so this is the first time that we're doing a install for the pandemic. So our first response was to stretch our shows, keep them up, try to open, see how it was going to work, and our shows that opened last January ended up being up for an entire year, which was kind of awesome in its like slowness and like ability to really go deep. Although I'll say not as many people were able to go deep as maybe the staff were who were able to get in the building. But Yeah, so it's like it's a funny time. It's cold and gray. It's Northeast Ohio in January.
Right. So,
Yeah.
whoa, Nicole, sorry, were you going to say something?
No, please go ahead.
Okay, cool. Okay, so I'm assuming you guys closed in mid-March, but then did you reopen at some point? When was that?
Not until November, or excuse me, October.
Oh,
And we modified our public hours. So instead of being open 6 days a week, we modified to 3 days a week. And we picked the 3 days that we knew typically had the highest attendance. And then we modified our hours just slightly. So we went, just truncated one of the days from 11 to 5 each day. And that lasted for about 6 weeks, give or take, until the decision was made to close again.
right. So because cases started to rise or something? Oh.
Yeah, there was an advisory in the county, and we were like, we should all not be maybe encouraging others together.
Right.
So back home we all went.
Yeah, got it. So have you guys been doing digital initiatives and so forth since then?
Yeah,
So-
we've been having a really, and Nicole can speak to this, but a really interesting conversation about the museum, about the sort of push to digital that I feel like so many institutions where all of a sudden it was like, as fast as you can, do everything that you were doing in person, online, and like amp it up, and the struggle of that in feasibility in terms of technology and knowledge, and how some things don't translate. And then also the fact that provides its own accessibility questions, because not everyone has access to the internet, and especially in Cleveland, digital redlining, Cole can speak to this, is a real thing. And so like we can't putting all of our eggs in that basket, and for a variety of different reasons, like how does that work, and who are we then speaking to, and how does our audience translate? So
Right. So Nicole, what was the experience like from the education dimension of what you were doing, or whatever you were going to say? Sorry.
Yeah, no, actually, thanks for queuing me up, because I was gonna add. One of the ways that I've always thought about the museum experience is what happens at the museum. So really emphasizing the importance of being in the space with artworks or art experiences. And so the digital platform that MOCA had was not very strong. And so when we had to move to being fully virtual, fully digital, it was a chance for all staff to really re-examine how we do our work. As Courtney shared, why we're doing it this way, or who is it for? And internally, it had to be who is going to do this work, and how are we going to maybe shift the priorities that different staff have. So some of the, or actually all of the staff who worked in the engagement department at the museum, they were incredibly awesome and moved to doing their engagements virtually. And so it was a learning process of, what does this look like? How do we want to do it? How do we make it feel like a MOCA experience? And who's going to do it? So I think some of those conversations we're still actually having it. They haven't quite like fully gestated yet, but we're still in the middle of some of those conversations.
I feel like from the onset of this situation that we face, there were kind of like two schools of thought, and one was like strike while the iron's hot or something. That's a bad colloquialism too. maybe not the right turn of phrase, but kind of like get this going online as fast as you can. Like, if you have an exhibition, then do some sort of virtual iteration of the exhibition. If you have classes, then give classes on Zoom. If you have concerts, then have concerts on Twitch. Just like move it all online like ASAP. Do you know what I mean? And then there was another school of thought. I think this is my inference or speculation. I think the first school of thought was tied to the idea that this was a temporary situation. And maybe more, I mean, this is a temporary situation. I mean, from a certain point of view, you know? I mean, like, this might be something that happens again, but there very likely will be another period of normalcy, right? Like, this will elapse, right? But I think the first school of thought was kind of connected to the idea that we were looking at, like, 6 to 9 months or something of this, or even, like, I think some people were looking at it more like 4 to 6 months, you know? Like, I just remember the early conversations. And then the second school of thought was more like, this is a new normal. This is not like create an online simulacra of life as a stopgap, but this is literally going to change your life, like, for the rest of your life. So the entire thing needs to be rethought, like, not just modes of representation, but what you're even doing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then
No, I feel.
those people tended to move more slowly. Do you know what I mean? And anyways, that's just a thought. What were you going to say? Sorry.
No, I was going to say, I think so. I think you're right on the money, is that there was a sort of like fear of also, at least, like, of not being relevant or needed, or like people would forget that the museum existed if we didn't suddenly like take up space in a space that, honestly, like as Nicole said, we hadn't been utilizing very well, or really like prioritizing, or like thinking through our practice, and like how it, in a hybrid model where we had already been like, how do we present these kinds of experiences or create space for people in a physical encounter and in a digital encounter. We hadn't been thinking like that. And so it is true. I think it is the new normal. This is going to happen again, and it's going to be this sort of like ebb and a flow. And I think for me, what I'm the most interested in is, how can it change our practice? Like, how can we rethink what it means to make a space where people gather to talk about art and ideas, when you might not be able to gather in person, but also when someone might not have access to like the most immediate technology that is available. Like, how do you create a connection point to something that's bigger than you? And I don't have any answers to that. It's just something I'm grappling with.
And, and I would add to that, I completely can identify with the like pressure, like people will forget us. And I have had comments from people in the community say like, what's available? It seems like nothing's happening. It's like, so much is happening. And so the tension point between the internal workings, and that a lot of work is happening and so much is in production and is being put out there. But if one person is not looking in just the right channel, it seems like nothing is happening. So I find that I'm thinking through and having conversations with my colleagues to say, okay, like, but how do we balance what we need to do internally to develop new ways of working, to readjust, our priorities, and to maximize skill sets that maybe we didn't think of as a particular person had, and then, and how to still get things out there too, so people are still connected with the museum. So I really feel that tension point between those two things.
Right. This is like in a way, like a different idea, but I think it connects back to what we're talking about. We can make it connect back to what we're talking about. One of the, maybe like, I think, well, this is my opinion, but the smartest thing I feel I've heard someone say about the entire situation writ large, of quarantine and lockdown, and then all of the related, trappings that arise, including, the digitization of everything and the reliance on things like Amazon and like whatever, is that this, I'm paraphrasing, but it was something like, it feels like things are slowing down, but actually things are speeding up.
Yeah. No, I completely think that's true. I think like time has become this like elusive and elastic thing that in the beginning of the sort of pandemic and lockdown and like negotiating this uncertainty. And I think that's what it was. Like no one knew, will it be over soon? Like how bad is it really? Like the spread of misinformation, like the sort of like uncertain unsureness, like slowed things down. And then people were like, oh wait, we'll just do this, like, and we'll do it differently, but we'll keep on doing exactly everything we did before. But we all have to learn how to adjust and adapt, which just makes it twice as hard. And then also there's some sort of sense of time, at least for me personally, where people are like, well, we've cut out all this time of like commuting and going there and being here. And the whole like joke of like living at work is like now real because people live at home and work potentially too, or like it's just like a really strange, I think things are speeding up in a way that I'm like desperate to slow down.
Right. So what is it that, I'm trying to put my finger on what you think is speeding up. Is it that you feel that like time is moving by more quickly, or because you're also talking about things like the implosion of the private space of home and the public space of work, and then like the transitions between engagements being like taking no time at all because you don't have to travel. So what specifically do you think is speeding up? Or be diffuse about it. I don't care, but just, you know what I mean?
No, I mean, it's a good question. I think for me personally, there are a couple of things that are all sort of collapsing in on one of themselves. One is this sort of like loose boundary between the private and the personal space and the workspace that I think has been creeping or blurring for a really long time. Like we're all already working too much and like our connection to these devices, and suddenly it becomes like okay for people to be like texting and scheduling meetings later, and the expectation that you're always working, and maybe also with this knowledge that they know that you have nowhere else to go. That I think is like a real thing for me personally. And then I think it's combined with honestly like a lack of resource or lack of humans. Like there are less people now working at the museum to do, if not the same, but more work, because the sort of hybrid model or thinking through this thoughtfully requires more time. But the output is still expected to maintain at a certain level. So I think we're not being honest that we're all sort of like working under a different condition, and that the condition itself requires care and time for ourselves as human beings who are producing this work. So that's it for me. I'll let Nicole weigh in on what she thinks it might be for her.
No, thanks for sharing that. It helped me clarify some of my feelings around it. And my experience of the time is, when I don't need to log into a meeting, which is not that often, but when I don't, I have no distractions in terms of like people stopping by my desk or the noise of the office. And so time actually stretches out and gets real. I can get real cozy and comfortable in it. And then as soon as I log back into the work conversations, this pace feels much different. And for me, one of the other elements of like how like time feels, or how it feels like it's speeding up, is just even listening to the news report. I listen to a lot of my news on the radio, and the way in which we're talking about our moment is normal. And it is like there's reports on, this is just how we're working now. And so I almost wonder, or I have been thinking about, is because we've just settled into like, this is our normal, that there's now okay, so there's no more waiting to see what's going to happen. This is just what it is. So let's quickly, catch up and kind of get in step with the other organizations or the other groups and the ways that they're working, and try to compete in the race, which is my analogy. I don't know that anyone else thinks it's a race, but.
Right. No, it's really easy to get really like conspiratorial about it, because there's definitely been this like win in terms of the like fecundity of the workforce. Do you know what I mean? In the sense that it's like you can just produce because of this sense of like, well, you're just at home. Why don't you just log on? Like you don't. It's not like you have anywhere to go. So you're not working. It's like everyone is regarded as limitless. Do you know what I mean? Like as though you're just going to assume the properties of the internet, which is probably not limitless, but it feels that way, right? And then of course the like increased reliance on delivered goods over brick and mortar stores or whatnot. Do you know what I'm saying? Like I don't adopt this perspective, but it's like worth pointing out that like people have benefited during this time from this situation, and it's weird to be on the other end of that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think it has like pros and cons. Like there are some things that I think are really incredible about so many people who are told that they couldn't do their jobs while taking care of their children, while being at home, while like not interacted, they would miss things, like all which has been disputed. Like there have been like different kinds of labor that I think have shifted in really positive, like there have been really positive things or like silver linings to this that I hope we hold on to as we move forward. I mean, just for instance, like changing the ability to like adapt and change and to know that we have the capacity to do that because we can point to these moments where we just did it. Like being able to open and then close or like readjust. Like we had to readjust some of even just the artworks, like rethinking how to install an artwork with the idea that you're trying to make it low touch. And then even like Nicole can speak to this, like our engagement guides at the museum, who for folks who might not know, are wonderful humans whose job it is to engage our learners and audience in conversations around the art and ideas. Like they can't get close to you, like they have to wear a mask. Like how do you make a space of that sort of encounter? Like, so I think the thinking through, and there's been some slowing down in the thinking through that I hope we carry forward. So I should say it's not all bad. I'm complaining about the things where I feel like it's creeping in for me and my personal practice, but I'm also like an inherently social person. I like miss people so much.
No word. I mean, that's a super optimistic take on what we're talking about, and I appreciate that. But when I said people have benefited from this, I was talking about like Elon Musk and like, do you know what I mean?
Oh, or sure, like Jeff Bezos people.
Yeah, I wasn't saying like, I got to get back into jogging or something like that. I mean, which is nice. And then, I mean, that is also true, and I appreciate you bringing that up. But you mentioned the engagement piece, which is what Nicole heads up. And as a bridge to that, because I very much want to talk about that, I want to work from this global perspective that we're taking to the show that happened recently or is happening, you can tell me, about creative practice and artists in the Midwest.
Yeah, so it's happening. Hopefully, it should open in July. And it was kind of like in an idea that had been percolating in a variety of different people's minds before the pandemic, but I will say like COVID and this sort of restructuring of the exhibition schedule and like rethinking of values and like commitment and like where time and energy wanted to be spent really solidified the urge to make a show that celebrated creative practice in the Midwest. And it's a collaboration between MOCA Cleveland, the CAC Cincinnati, and not yet public. There is a third institution also in the Midwest who's joined forces with us, but they have to like officially approve it at their board. So I'm hesitant to say it out loud, but 98.8% joining us. And so we've just been doing a tremendous amount of studio visits. So there's 3 curators involved in the project, and we've been doing them all on Zoom, which has also been a different way to get to know an artist or have a conversation. I think we're learning that all differently. And so it's coming together. Right now, we have just extended invitations to 15 artists, and we're still doing studio visits to sort of pull out some of the themes that we're finding whether it's artists from Detroit, St. Louis, Cincinnati, Cleveland, Columbus, Kansas City, Minneapolis, Pittsburgh. Our definition of the Midwest has also been an exploration and like how people define regionality and like what sense of place really means, and what it meant before this moment and how it's sort of like creeping into work now.
And I want to talk about sense of place, as you know, but what has it been like working with the artists in the Midwest that is, I'm going to rephrase this question. Has there been something about working with a concentrated group of artists from the Midwest that differs from your experience working with coastal artists or the international arts scene or something in some meaningful way that you would care to share?
Yeah, I mean, it's been really generative. I think the thing that I've noticed the most is how interconnected the group already is, even though they might not know each other. So there's a sort of like one person will know somebody who knows this other person, or they've seen their show, or they went to grad school in the same place. There's also a lot of artists who relocated to the Midwest for graduate school and then never left, and helped kind of create and sustain the sort of vibrant artistic communities that exist in some of these different smaller cities or even college towns. So that's been really interesting. And I also would say on the flip end of that, there's also a lot of artists in the show who are born in the Midwest, grew up in the Midwest, and then still live in the Midwest, but not necessarily in the exact same city. And so that's been really interesting to sort of see the connections between how people grew up and like where they learned about art and then where they're practicing. And there's definitely a sensibility that's coming across. And some really interesting things, focuses on work and like both like from a formal aesthetic, but also conceptual things that are being explored by people from very different backgrounds and, you know, different practices and mediums, but they're thinking through the ideas at the same time in the same place that I feel like feels connected in particular to being in this region.
So it feels like there's like a zeitgeist in the Midwest that's kind of like self-referential in a good way, meaning like in the way that there's like a conversation in New York and there's a conversation in LA, and they're kind of different, but they're kind of just thinking about the conversation they're having. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I would say this is like slightly more expansive because it's crossing a much larger swath of geography, especially the way that we're thinking about the Midwest. But it does seem to me that there's some of the same, they're having a conversation that is interconnected. And one of the hopes of this show is to show those connections. So you can see, you know, an artist working with textiles in Minneapolis, who is like exploring some of the exact same things as a painter in Detroit, and they might not actually have ever met or considered their work in conversation. But when you start to pull it out and talk about it in relationship to the region, it starts to form these really interesting patterns. So I'm excited to see it come together in space. Yeah.
Courtney, is there...
Hold tight. Sorry about this. So that was fascinating. As I mentioned earlier in the show, I had to switch to Zoom at the last minute for a stupid reason, and apparently my account is not accommodating the exact thing that I am trying to do. So this is going to be a little weird. But while I'm doing this nonsense, I will share with you that I had the good fortune of being able to visit Cleveland MOCA a couple years ago. And I worked on a piece with the artists Tauba Auerbach and Eliane Radig. and with my band Z's, and it was sick. Courtney, I met at that time and was amazing, and Nicole, I'm just meeting for the first time tonight. Yeah, they're lovely, and I can't wait to get them back on here. So, with no further ado, I will go back into the Zoom window, having handled this absolutely masterfully. Okay, guys. So this is I've been leading a monologue here since I lost you. This is related to my difficulties with Chrome. I had a problem with Chrome today, and suddenly I can't use what I normally use. So we're on Zoom. So this is happening, but everybody's forgiving and actually excited about technical problems now. Because they're so relatable. Okay, we're back. So before we go on, though, because Nicole, I want to hear what you were saying. Before we go on, in 40 minutes, this is gonna happen again. We'll probably still be talking in 40 minutes, but I'll give you a heads up next time.
Okay.
And that was actually pretty clean. I felt like
Super.
I kept it going. I did some like stage banter while you guys were away. So okay, Nicole, hit it.
Oh, yeah.
You were saying
Courtney,
something.
I was just going to ask you, as you're having these studio visits and noticing artists from Minneapolis, artists from maybe Chicago or wherever, or Detroit, that there are things that somehow connect them, is part of building the exhibition going to be having them talk together? I know that's something that usually happens when we talk about programming after an exhibition is open, but is that something that might happen before it opens?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Yeah, I think so for sure. And one of the things also is because we extended these invitations to this really wonderful group of artists, and then we set up meetings to be like, does the project that we're thinking of seem like generative to you, and like how might you think about your participation? And every single one was like, who else is in it? I'm so excited. And I think that was such for me, like through line too, that they also wanted to know and like learn more about one another's practice. And so, yeah, I'm hoping we can facilitate getting all together in some form, be it Zoom or in person, and starting to have those connections become able to be, kind of this, like chopping it up and chatting and like being able to like have that creative community of folks grow on its own in an organic way. And one of the other ideas around the show is that it'll sort of grow as it changes location. So the spaces and architectures of the buildings are all different, and we're planning to make a sort of digital catalog that will be alive during the show, which is something I'm really excited about. This the benefit of the technology is that we can keep adding to the book while it's online, and so it can sort of be living as the show lives, and then encapsulate what the exhibition was like at all of the different institutions. So yeah, it's exciting.
That's exciting.
Huh. So this is kind of pivoting naturally into this engagement piece, which I love. But I have one other question before we go full deep dive into engagement, which brings up all sorts of other exciting issues. What's the like art mecca of the Midwest? Chicago or
Cleveland, obviously.
Yeah,
my mistake, my bad.
Yes, nice.
Or Detroit?
I think it would depend on how you not to be like particular, but how you define art mecca. Because I think if you're thinking about it from a market perspective or a concentration of institution perspective, but yeah, I don't know. That would be a hard question to answer.
Well, but but let's try. From the point of view of concentration of institutions, where is it like going down?
Then you start, I would say, between Detroit and Chicago, you have a pretty good competition, although I would say St. Louis is giving you a run for your money too in terms of institutions with like the Pulitzer and the Luminary and CAM. And there's a lot of artist-run spaces in the Midwest that do like incredible, vibrant programming. So it's tricky. I would say most people would say Chicago because of the sort of MCA Art Institute, and then honestly the school, the art school, and the sort of grad program, and that has like a sort of like convening spot for artists and creative folks. But yeah, I would argue these other cities are creeping up maybe around.
Got you. Interesting. So it's a little bit more diasporic, but from a commercial perspective,
Chicago,
because they have like an actual gallery scene and they like sell work and like, but do people like, are people like aspiring artists and then they like move to Chicago to do that?
At least almost everyone that I've been talking to moved to Chicago for school or was already from there. And so I don't know of any artists who are like growing up in like, or living in like, I don't know, like Iowa or Texas or Florida, and we're like, Chicago is where I'm going to make it big. Or
right.
Like, but I do think that people go for other reasons, because the artistic community is so amazingly welcoming and so generative. So, but I would say in my personal experience, of which I know, only the people that I know, a lot of them went for school, for like undergrad or grad, and stayed, or for teaching positions. And so, yeah.
Right. Well, what you're talking about with the, like all of the minor cities, like having these different institutions and artist run spaces and galleries and such, to me, that sounds super fertile and interesting. I'm like super pro minor market. Like, I think that there's like a dopamine crisis in major cities, because it's like the combination of the like hecticness of the city with the like increasing reliance on communication through social media and whatever, which is like literally designed to get you like hooked on this like dopamine drip, like, and then the increasing rise of sponsorship, like corporate sponsorship kind of supplanting philanthropy. Do you know what I mean? Which necessarily means like everything in a way that works, but like in a very important way it doesn't work, because corporate sponsorship is always driven by like catching a look, like getting a look. So there's gonna always inherently be this like hyper over focusing on major markets, right? It's like in my experience as a musician, it used to be the way that you would get up as a musician was you would travel from town to town to town to town to town, and you would play like Akron, Ohio, and Cleveland, and Cincinnati, and I've played like literally 100 shows in Ohio, because you guys have like 12 cities. Do you know what I mean?
So many great cities that you are perfectly distanced to stop on your way to other places.
Yeah, you can play like 4 on the way to California and 4 on the way back. Do you know what I mean? And like it used to be like that's how you got the word out, was that you just got in front of as many people as possible in as many places as possible, because like how else would you get the word out, right? But since the rise of corporate sponsorship, it creates this feeling that things only happen in like 6 places. It's just like New York, Tokyo, LA, Berlin, London, Mexico City, and like Rome or Moscow or something. You know what I mean? And it's like, but I think that that's actually to the detriment of those places, especially living in New York City. The like incessant like messaging of like branding and like the funneling of like money that are creating these kind of like neoliberal utopia, like abundance, lifestyle branding, like just kind of constantly blasting at you. It's like burning people out. And I think it like hurts the capacity to be creative. And actually more importantly, it hurts your capacity for like thirst for creative experiences. Do you know what I mean? Like when you go play minor markets, when you travel to, I've talked about this on the podcast before, so whatever, bear with me if you're listening and you listen to those ones. But like when you go to like smaller markets, it's just better energy. People are really excited. And like that's the thing. Like that's like the assault, this like corporate assault on the major markets becomes this like attack on your ability to get excited. Do you know what I'm saying? And it's like places like when I was out visiting in December, like 2 Decembers ago or whatever, like I was like, this is amazing. I love it out here. Do you know what I mean? Like when I was in Cleveland and Detroit and stuff, because it was like there was like open space and people just didn't seem so like beleaguered. Do you know what I mean? Anyways, that is a rant, but go on. Sorry.
No, but I think because I think the thing that I think is interesting about the creative communities and all of these different places is that they're small, so they have a small town feel to them in a way that people show up to support one another. There are still like multiple artistic communities. Like if you're into a certain kind of scene, like you still have your own group that doesn't necessarily interact with all of the people who are doing other things, but then it's scaled down in a way that actually makes it feasible to participate, or at least that's what it seems like for me. And that participation is really key because you have some skin in the game. Like you are a creative person and you are supporting other creative people and you're building something that is for you and for your extended community, and there's an investment in that I think you can see it. And I think that does exist in New York and Rome and Moscow and these places. It's just the version that gets sold to us. It's not that.
Right.
That's still happening. It's just not the thing that's being packaged and messaged to all of us. So it creates like a false, maybe, or not a false dream or like a false idol, but I don't know, something that it's like another market, another part of capitalism's ongoing quest for us to like produce and desire.
Right. Well, participation, that like is a perfect tee up for Nicole's, stomping ground.
I totally heard that word and was like, it's coming.
Yeah, 100%. So tell us, well, like just to like get it, like open it up, just tell us about what you do at the museum in general.
Yeah, I would say if I were to kind of just build right off of what Courtney was sharing, the other part of the formula, if you will, is the people who want to have art experiences, and not just the ones who are creating them. I do recognize that those are valid, people who are consuming art experiences, but the just kind of everyday art appreciators, or the people who want to go and be in spaces where cultural experiences or cultural works are being produced. So the work that I do, and I've been working as a museum educator and arts administrator for double digits years now, and it really became very obvious to me that while it's important to place artists at the center of our practice and to think about how to support artists, we also need to be thinking about how to support the people who want to come and have art experiences. And so I think a lot about what our relationship is with not only the museum, but also what happens when you are there, what happens in the gallery spaces, and talk about how 2020 really has just challenged my thinking on what we do is, but a big part of our work is how do you slow people down and how do you customize the experience so that it's personally meaningful for them, that they themselves are, yes, they're hearing, some of the messages that the museum has to share, the curator, the artist, but also how do they hear things, I don't know if I just bleeped out, but how do they get connected to what it makes them think about, and get them building, different capacities in relationship to interpreting art, but also capacities that can be live or be applied outside of art experiences. So, experimentation, sitting with uncertainty or sitting with discomfort. Those are big things that happen a lot at a contemporary art space. So the team that I've been fortunate enough to develop over the last, how long has it been now? Not quite 2 years. We started working in this way about 2 years ago. They are a team of individuals. There's about 15 to 20 of us, and they rotate throughout the museum. MOCA Cleveland is not a very expansive museum. And so the idea is that how do we work in intentional ways that are cohesive or support a cohesive experience? So if you come into the museum, we most importantly, the thing that we want to know is, why did you come in? And that sometimes gets a lot of weird looks, like, well, why would you ask me that question? Or obviously you should know. But based on what someone says, we can then give them a tool, an experience, the direct line to what they're trying to do, so that their expectations of what they are kind of looking to have happen, that we can get them going with that. But then our work is to also stretch them and to get people thinking about what more can a museum experience be, what more can my art experience be, or what I might think about these particular ideas, and what does that help me understand about myself in the world. So, lofty goals that we try to pack into Thursday through Friday, or Thursday through Saturday. So that is, I would say, the shortest elevator speech that I have of what my work is.
Word. So tell us about the thing where, I think you were just telling us about it, but people come into the museum. People, sure. I'm going to talk about it like someone who doesn't understand. People come into the museum, and there are people that work for you in the museum, and they're just kind of like hanging out, and they might like sidle up to you and be like, so like, how about this painting? Or something along these lines. Correct? Because it's like, the way that you describe it, which was very cogent and lucid and fine and good, but it's like, I want to tease out the specific element of it, because this happened to me while I was there waiting for Courtney for some reason. I don't know. Okay. And so I was in the exhibit with the giant yellow kind of multiform sculptures that were like huge. And one of your team members approached me to talk about it, and I thought it was really interesting and it was very effective. But just to like tease it out for the people who are watching, you kind of have these plants around the museum, as in like human plants, like people who are put there to engage with people about art, and it's like pretty free form. It's like they're kind of just there to sort of spruce up the vibe and kind of get people's gears turning. I mean, right? Or am I missing something about it?
No, I'm enjoying your retelling and some of your descriptors that they just slide right up to. That's kind of nice. So there are standard roles that art museums have, like a guard in the exhibition space, or a visitor services person who may take your admission and kind of get some basic information, someone who works at an information desk. So we, MOCA had all of those roles as well, and it just wasn't working. People who were coming to MOCA were like, it was just a disjointed experience. They were frustrated. It just felt like for what they thought they were going to get, they weren't getting enough. And what we found over time, which was very apparent to me, but it took the whole organization to realize this, is that whenever a person who visited the museum spent time with a staff person, and obviously someone in education or engagement, maybe even the curator, the person walked away feeling like they were so satisfied, and that they had a personal revelation, or something that, maybe that's a little bit big, but that they walked away having an understanding of what the experience was and what it meant to them. And so MOCA made a commitment to say, okay, how do we make sure that, or how do we shift in a way that all of the people who are working in the different areas of the museum, that they are trained to be able to have an interpretive conversation, or a conversation that's in relationship to the museum experience, that's going to be in support of whoever comes into the museum. So, one of the ways that we might do that is by just leading with a really open-ended question, like, what are your questions? Or I noticed that you're spending a lot of time with this particular artwork. Tell me what about it is keeping your attention. And so the goal is to start conversations. And it sounds like, Sam, that you were receptive to it. We have found that by and large, people really are feeling like this is something that has just never happened before. And just like this radical thing, people want to talk to you about art that you don't know. But for anyone who would say, like, I don't want to talk with you, or I'm having my own experience, or I'm fully invested in the person that I'm with, we're not going to require that you have a conversation with us. It's an opportunity to say, I'm checking in with you. I'm a person who has a lot of information. I also am trained to kind of facilitate conversation and art interpretation skills. So do you want to connect and slow down? So it's a team of people that, if you're at the welcome desk, the people who come in and you say hello to, if you're in the exhibition space, when we had our learning labs open, or our making spaces, that they all have the same training and they all have the same goal, which is to support the museum experience that you, Sam, wanted to have. So that is
Good.
That's their work.
It's our work. It's
Yeah.
a really cool model. Now, is that something that you know of that's being practiced at other spaces?
Museums, or different museums and art museums that I've been familiar with for years, have had versions of what we're talking about. So it's nothing that is like so brand new. I would say what makes it different from other positions and other museums that I'm familiar with is that these are the individuals that are also doing preventative artwork conservation. They're also doing the the demographic evaluation, collection of data that would happen at Welcome Center. They're also doing, concierge support to say, oh, you're in the space here and you're asking about where to get a coffee. You can go around the corner, or there's this other art venue. So we collapsed multiple museum roles into one position. And so I think that's what makes it different. It also, the fact that they rotate throughout the entire museum, that they're not just in a fixed position, meaning they only have one area of responsibility. They really have a sense of a full way of a more full way of the way the museum is working. And again, it's a way to make the visitor's experience or the learner's experience a more cohesive visit, so that the way that you and I are talking on the ground floor is going to be the same way that someone engages with you on other floors. It's not you feel like you're in kind of 3 or 4 different venues at the same time.
That sounds to me like, in addition to accomplishing what you're describing, where the visitor has this more engaged kind of 3-dimensional experience, that it would also function from a management perspective, not like scientific management, but like learning organization management, to kind of acknowledge something about the people who work there that about art. You can get up, you can walk around, you can be a representative of the museum, you can, lead a conversation, and people will kind of regard you in that way. And so this would, I believe, foster more identification across the board with the team, with the mission of the organization. Is that true?
Yes, absolutely. And, I'm just this weekend was reading some visitor comments some staff comments from a few years ago. And, people are saying, oh, I just don't know what the mission of the museum is, or I don't understand how this particular department works. So another layer to this position is an effort to even more professionalize the role and integrate it into the entire workings of the organization. I don't know why. I've tried to unpack it for years now, but like there has always been this divide between, you know, the front of the house and the back of the house. And so it's really important to me that we stop using that language, because the perception that the people who work with visitors are over there and the rest of us are over here. People felt that. The staff who worked with visitors really, really felt that. And so they felt disconnected from conversations. They felt disconnected from decisions for why the organization works the way that it works. They felt like they didn't really have any agency in influencing decisions around what happens in the exhibitions. You know, things that really dramatically impact when visitors come in or learners come in. So this organizational change was absolutely about supporting people who want to get connected to MOCA, but it was also a way to grow as an organization and professionalize more roles and be a more cohesive unit as an organization. So if you can catch a theme, I am big on cohesion.
That's
or
amazing.
trying to find it somehow.
But what's brilliant about that is that then that feeds back into the engagement.
Totally. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
That's exactly how the learning organization is supposed to work. I don't know if you guys check this stuff out, but I have this weird thing about management theory. Like, I buy Harvard Business Review when I take a flight and stuff. Anyways, but learning organization.
I love it too. It's okay.
Yeah. Peter M. Senge, whatever. It's that's like a case study of how it's meant to work. Like, people are learning, people are sharing, other people are learning from those people. The people that are learning feel good. The people that are doing the sharing feel good. So then they're more psyched the next time. And then because they're more psyched, the other people, they're psyched too. They come back, and then you start evolving in this kind of it becomes a positive reinforcing feedback loop.
And you can see it, and I mean, there's a testament to the work that Nicole and everyone on this team has done, but people then feel empowered from their experience of having a conversation and an encounter, that then they bring someone else with them to almost facilitate that for someone else. So it does have this sort of expansiveness where it's doing this loop within the staff too, where more and more people are feeling their interpretation or their way that they would tell a story around an artwork is as valid or as intriguing or interesting or a way to relate to people as someone else's. And then that is really breaking down something for our learners and our audience, because then they can think their relationship to it, which comes from their unique position, is a way to bring someone else into it. And so it's a really go ahead.
No, I love it. I'm sorry I cut you off. I forgot what I was going to say now. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, you're fine. Well, I have a pivot. I'm going to pivot. That's brilliant and amazing. Congratulations on a job well done. That's I'm actually really inspired hearing about that. I mean, it's always a challenge with a team in a cultural space to keep morale up, you know what I mean? And so that's a really brilliant, but I think that engaging with what you're doing more deeply is an inherent morale booster, and then also being appreciated for doing that by sharing that engagement with the guests is, and of course the guests having the better experience or improved experience or enhanced or whatever. This is super, super amazing. Congrats. Okay, pivot. But this is something that I always think about when I talk about with people engagement and participation. And I also think about it in relationship to my own work or in relationship to my own work as a curator. At the space that I operate, I'm not really a curator. I mean, I curate sometimes, and I do curate programs outside of my space. But my space is we do 3-4 activations a night. And it's we're facilitators. We're making people's thing happen. Do you know what I mean? Now, there's some degree of selectiveness, and there's also a sort of self-selecting quality to the place that certain people just wouldn't ask to be part of it. But we're not really curating as much as we are facilitating and supporting. You know what I mean? But I do work as a curator outside of the walls of this venue. And, oh no, not again. Okay, we have 10 minutes and then we're gonna have to take another intermission, but that's okay. I think it went fine last time. So participation, right? There's one of the things that's been really amazing about working in really, really like street level, like culture spaces is that I've been privy to a lot of cultural forms that essentially operate as folk cultures, folk traditions. Like they don't have an institutional dimension. There isn't a place to go get a degree in these things, right? And in these settings, participation is a given. Do you know what I mean? It's like you would be hard pressed to prevent someone from participating. Do you know what I mean? Like that would be weird and bizarre if you tried to prevent someone from participating. And I think there's a lot of things like this basically in like Western institutional life, where like there's a lot of analogies in music. Like for example, I don't know if this is something you're familiar with, but there's a whole dimension of music theory called like microtonality. Do you know what I mean? Well, in the 18th century, we made this kind of map of harmonic space, and we were like, these are the notes. Do you know what I mean? And so then anything that's not that, which of course always existed, do you know what I mean? And has been practiced all over the world from the beginning of music until the present. Anything that's not like these notes that we made up are now like microtones. Do you know what I mean? And so then it's like, well, how do we integrate these microtones into what we're doing? So it's a similar kind of problem, and I'll explain why. It's because we set up these edifices where it causes these problems that we then have to solve. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think there's every reason to believe that culture initially, or any exposure that we have to cultures that seem to be practiced more or less in the way they were always practiced, feel participatory inherently. Do you know what I mean? And yet there's lots of cultural circumstances, many of which I am a part of and an advocate for, wherein there's this thing that has to go on where it's like, no, you can come, no, sit here, like, no, it's okay, you can make a noise, or you can raise your hand, or you can be a part of this, and everybody has to be like invited back into it. Do you understand what I mean? And it's like, I'm always curious to hear what people think about how we got there. And then also, it's a lot like we use all of these skin products that like strip, like soap and stuff that like strip oil out of our skin, and then we have to buy other lotion to like put it back in. Do you know what I mean? Like it's like something we do. We do it in like every area of life where we cause these problems that then have to be solved. But like yeah, like what do you think about that? Because it's like let me think. Is the model that like somehow, like the apotheosis of this work is that museums somehow like embody something more like a folk kind of practice where everybody just goes in and knows the score and understands how to participate and engage? Do you know what I mean? Or does the museum exist in a kind of separate epistemological category wherein there's always this kind of need because there's something didactic about it? Do you understand what I mean? Like in a positive way. I don't mean didactic in like a pedantic way. You know what I mean? Sorry, deep dive.
No, it's good. It's good.
Yeah.
I think
yeah, go.
No, go ahead. No, Nicole, you go.
I think museums need to, my experience is hyper-focused in one type of museum, but I think it needs to work towards, Sam, what you're describing, in that like we are making the experience as it's happening, and I am an active participant in it, and I have some agency and I have responsibility to shaping it. However, I think the way that museums kind of were like born out of the earth by white people, and shape them, and like, I'm gonna take these things and only certain people can come see them at certain times, and we're gonna now set up what an expert looks like, and that what an expert has to share is word, and everyone must take that in. And we're living with about a century of that kind of a model, and the pivot that's happening now, but it's been happening, is the how to, for the people who are willing to come through, how to make it their own, but then also how is making it their own, how can that then spill over and that messaging reach the people who think that experience is not for them. So one of the things, one of the other reasons that the engagement guide position is so important is to build confidence that you can shape this experience how you need to have it. So if you need to be here for 2 minutes, cool. If you need to be 2 hours, that's cool too. If you want to have a conversation related to this, that's okay. But by and large, especially adults, especially adults who've been through a conventional education system, they expect to be talked to, not talked with. And so we're also changing the art every couple of months, and we're also introducing artworks that there may not be, decades and decades of scholarship that we can just lean on in terms of like, this is what this means. This is why this is important. It throws people off. It throws visitors off when you say, we don't know if this is going to be a great master or like a work of art that lasts for decades and decades and decades in the way that your love of Monet has persisted. So the fact that people are asked to show up, have some questions, have some thoughts, have a conversation, we're also teaching that it's an okay space for that. So I would say that museums, kind of were established as a place where you actually don't have an opinion or a voice. You kind of are told what to think, which we would call the banking system of education. You're an empty vessel, and I'm going to fill you up with my my excellent European knowledge. But we're moving away from that towards something that is more about multiple voices having equal value and multiple perspectives. There are many correct answers, not just one right answer. So that would be my response to what you shared. But Courtney, I'm really interested to hear.
That was amazing. That was
are.
amazing, though. Props, because I was really coming at you with all these like crazy things and stuff. But that was like,
this is my job. This is my job.
no.
Is to listen to what people are sharing and try to be like, okay.
But I think you really so poetically and eloquently also started to untangle this thing, which is like the museum is mostly perceived by people as a place of the collection. And so what does it mean to work at a non-collecting, constantly changing space like MOCA and still use the museum? Because I think of like our institution as like a public or civic or common space that's co-produced by our staff and the subjects or objects or artists who inhabit it temporarily. And so it's constantly changing. And so that is tricky for me because that idea of collectivity, both inclusive and exclusive, is a construct. And so it's shaped by, and it's purposely designed as a construct. And there are all these other markers that go into how it's read, like the building and these codes of conduct and even just the sort of weight of colonialism. Like there's reason that we've sort of selected certain works to keep and then decided who's allowed to keep them. And then even the standards of care are decided by a specific group of people. So your description of the notes and how they get decided is exactly the same way that a museum came into being. And I think we're all trying to now sort of like break it apart and look at which parts of those constructs are serving us and which ones are actually really need to be like thrown away or dismantled.
This is amazing because we're just about to lose each other briefly. It says less than a minute. But wait a minute. Okay, so Nicole, go, but know that we're going to be right back if we get cut off. Sorry, go.
Courtney, you used a really important word that's central to our work, which is to become users of the museum. And that, I think, is just a through line that informs our practice. So I'll stop there. And should we log off and come back on?
Yeah, why don't we just do that? We'll just make it easy. I'll be back in 1 minute.
1, 2, 3.
Okay, amazing. Are you back?
Yeah, back.
Okay.
Round 3.
No.
This is like just getting good too. When I first started doing this podcast, I'd be like so mortified if this happened, you know. But like now, I've become much more mellow about all of this stuff. I feel like people get it. Do you know what I mean? Like I don't have like a team here, you know. Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
Also, I think there's something nice about it. It's reminding us that this is like a living thing. Like it gets interrupted, and like we have to like adjust and move. I don't know. It's like part of the sort of embrace of the imperfection of our moment.
absolutely, yeah. It's like a punk.
Yeah.
But okay, but wait a minute. Oh man, you guys
Can
were
I
both
respond to
both
something
waxing
that
so
she said
deep.
right before we left?
Yeah, you were talking about use.
Yeah, when you
Users
said,
of
like,
the museum.
Users of the museum, and it's funny because we've talked about this before, like in our work and relationship together at the museum, and I've been thinking more about my personal curatorial practice and this idea of being a co-producer or like an editor, a supporter, caretaker of an artist idea. But now I've been thinking about it that we're co-producing with our learners, and so like, and also that the entire staff at the museum is co-producing, that it's not, there is this sort of intimate one-to-one relationship that I often have with an artist when I'm like working on a project, but that holistically can get expanded on, and that if we slow down and sort of like, this is something that I've learned from working with Nicole, and I have been super lucky to have worked with so many wonderful people who come from education and engagement in my like career as a curator, and it's like historically a space in which like often these departments are like at odds. And so I feel very lucky that I try and lean in and learn all of the things, trying to absorb as much from Nicole and her team as I can. But I think if we all listen to the feelings that come from these encounters with objects and each other, then we can sort of open up these structures more and really like figure out what is working and doesn't work. And I don't know, that's something that like the way that engagement guides sort of think through their practice is something that I'm trying to sort of like let be part of mine, or also is part of mine in a different way, and then sort of like have it ebb and flow back and forth. Yeah.
Courtney, what you just shared literally brought tears to my eyes, that your practice is growing and evolving in relationship. And I just want to like, share some love, and that I have felt so lucky to work with you, and the openness and the questions and the like true collaborative approach, where we're coming together and we're talking it through at the same time, and that all of the people involved have an opportunity to contribute. So this is a way that I've never been able to work with a curator before, but have fantasized about it. So thank you.
Amazing. What a great moment on the pod. This is amazing. Cool. All right. So wait a minute. So, okay, I have another wrench here that I'm sure you will wield masterfully. So does the property of, okay, this is a two-part question. Does the property of, or let me say this differently. Does the perception around museums as containing extremely valuable, precious objects cut into engagement initiatives or participation, or the participatory? And are there modalities of work that work better with engagement and participation, and what are they?
I feel like I'm in a job interview all of a sudden.
You can come work at my Dirty Punk Club in New York City. Yes, congratulations,
What is
Nicole.
Yeah.
Intrinsic value of art. Go.
Yeah. There are, I mean, yes. Caring for or being the stewards of art experiences or artworks while they are at MOCA Cleveland is absolutely something that's on our mind and a priority. Finding the balance of how to have participatory experiences that we're maybe planning out in advance or doing maybe more improvisationally with people as they come in. It really ebbs and flows with each exhibition. That it's not always the same. And so one of the ways that we work cross-departmentally is to understand what are some of the most important concerns that the exhibition department has in terms of preventative conservation. There is less, at this point in my career, there's less of the preciousness of what we can do with or near artworks in terms of maybe the like humor or silliness. I mean, Sam, a while ago, round one, I think you are referencing like even just making noise in a space. I have literally heard people at MOCA annoyed that kids were laughing in the galleries and having a really good time. And it was not a MOCA staff person, by the way. It was someone who was there visiting, who said, like, can you please make those kids stop laughing? Like, it was really annoying to them. Which I thought if a 4-year-old's joyful laughter is something that you need to have stop, I mean, your cold soul maybe has no hope. But so there is still some, preciousness about what should happen in a museum space. But the more that I think people come to MOCA and are being asked to participate more fully, the more that they're trusting that it's okay. Not all of our engagement staff are ready to, we're going to soon take a class on improvisation. So the flexibility in terms of like how you might interact, we still have some stretching to do. And I would say in terms of like what lends themselves better, this upcoming season, there's a film. So it's time-based, it's in a very specific location that's low lighting, it's gonna have, I'm sure, volume that would make it difficult to talk over. So what participation looks like, it will have to change, meaning how do we set someone up before they go into the experience, and then what is the way that once they've decided to conclude it, that we might want to kind of tap into what happened and then link them to something else. I mean, another thing that works well is when there's just space, like physical space for a group of people to be. So if there's many works of art that are clustered together, visually anyway, or maybe off in a corner, it makes it hard for multiple people to be in conversation with each other. And the beautiful thing about multiple people is that, just like Sam, what you were saying a minute ago, is like it's just starting to get good. It's like, multiple voices, it starts to crescendo and you get that momentum. So just physical space constraints, so where and how things are installed, sometimes can really be the biggest impediment to participatory, like intentionally organized participatory interactions.
Got it. Interesting.
Yeah. And I think, maybe I'll pick up on a little bit of a different thing about value, because it definitely comes up. And I would say how we place value on works of art in terms of like how we take care of them, but then also like how people negotiate their relationship to how much they're worth, like how much the insurance is or how much something sells for, and like that relationship to class and also to capitalism and to the sort of like talking about art as like a sort of nourishment, soulful, creative practice of the avant-garde, and its relationship to being a luxury good that is bought and sold, and how you negotiate that. And I would say like internally it comes a lot, and we are super fortunate in the work that we do at MOCA that we mostly work with living artists. And so the way that I would say the way that value gets ascribed in our internal practice is it's about helping an artist realize the vision and the value that comes from being able to sort of participate in that. Whether it's like being able to install it, help fabricate it, help message it, have conversations, like get the sort of thing out, make an encounter with it possible. We've had like interactive works where like we've literally had to take care of them, like where we've had to like replenish flowers or like keep something physically alive, or just like the Lou Wei show that you saw when you were there like 2 Decembers ago, like the pride of physically assembling the giant sculpture is also matched with a sort of like, how do you negotiate the fact that it then is like bought and sold on this market where it's really hard to quantify like why one painting and one sculpture costs so much more money than something when the value. And so I think it's redefining our relationship to value. And I would say from an internal perspective or personal perspective, it's a lot to do with the really great role that we have in making things. Like we are part of the making. And because we don't collect, we don't keep it goes out, and we're sort of like the people who help birth. I don't know, I guess we're like the doula. We like help birth things. And then I don't know what happens to your kids when they go out into the world.
Right.
Some are more successful than others based on whoever's metrics of success, but like you walk out the door healthy, happy.
Right, but you're like interstitial. So I'm going to tell you guys a story because I'm interested in your feedback, because I've curated scores of musical programs, many of them I've curated thousands of musical programs, but I've curated scores of musical programs in the fine arts world. But only one time have I curated visual art in the fine arts world. And it was at a museum that will go unnamed. The way that I was able to do this, and it was the foyer of the museum. I was given the foyer, like the lobby essentially, but which was majestic and plentiful. It was large, you know. And the way that I was able to do this was that I was doing a very ambitious music program for them that was half in their museum and half in other venues in the same borough of New York as that museum. And they were working, it was one of those things where they were coming with X amount of dollars and it really wasn't a competitive amount of money, not for me, to do the program they wanted to do. It was, you know, so they were kind of banking on a much, much, much smaller cultural institution being able to dial in homey favors for amounts of money that if a museum asked those same people to play, they would never play for that amount of money. Do you understand what I'm saying? Which I was wise to. I got it. You know, I was like, okay, I get it. I was like, I'll do it, but I want to do a visual art program with the concert program. That was kind of my deal. I was like, I will make this happen for you because I can, and I understand what you're trying to do, but what I want is to have floor space in the museum, right? So they gave me floor space in the museum, I think reluctantly, but they agreed to the foyer. And so then what I wanted to do, and this ties into engagement and participation, which is why I'm telling this story. Then what I wanted to do was have because the name of my music program was Becoming New Objects, which was like becoming a new object is like a idea in psychoanalysis, but like a becoming new object in the sense like a beautiful new object, you know, which I thought was clever. Anyways, so then I wanted to have I had 4 visual art collectives. They were all multiple people. Four visual art collectives make work or have work that they made that itself was generative in nature, so that the work that was installed wouldn't just be installed and sit there in the foyer, would then actually be trafficked and utilized by people in the foyer in the service of making more work, so that it would purpose the museum space as a node of generative activity rather than as a place of presentation. And this made this person furious. I mean, they were furious about this. They were like, it was like I had deceived them or something. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, because it was like, I said you could put visual art in here, but now you're putting in this thing that makes visual art I got the feeling that like the issue was that they couldn't, they could sign off on these artists, which they did. I said, okay, these 4 groups, and they said, okay. I mean, they had to agree to it, right? It couldn't just be anything that I wanted to. But we arrived at 4 groups, and they agreed to it. But then the punchline for them was that, okay, but what they're going to do is something that actually produces new work, and that whatever that new work is, of course, nobody knew what that new work would be, right? And it was like that dimension of it just made them, they were so angry. And it was like, it really came down to was like, if you don't let me do this, I'm pulling the music program. It like just got down to literally like brass tacks. Like, you said I could do this, you didn't make this like stipulation, so this is within the terms of the agreement, and if you don't let me do it, I'm pulling the program. And so they let me do it, but that was like how ill it got. So from your point of view, what was it's because listening to you guys talk, it sounds like that's exactly the kind of thing that you would do. But what do you think? Was that over the line? Was I over the line by like allowing all of this new stuff to get made in the museum?
No, I think like your encounter, I would say, and relationship with the museum from the get-go is also maybe, what's the word that I want? Maybe not also starting from a place of transparency or like mutual understanding.
Right.
Or it is like in the sense that you understand what each other wants, but you're not building something from the ground up, which is usually the best foundation to start with. Not saying that everyone does that. And I would say institutions are by nature risk averse and often say that they're interested in experimentation and openness and fluidity. And then actually that makes them really, really nervous. And then they tend to clam up. And because it's hard to leave things open and uncertain and not know what's going to happen. Like I think a lot of my own practice about what does it mean to be live in the museum, which a lot of people think is where objects go to die, or like your soul dies, or like you're put in a box like like the museum for many is a mausoleum. So like, how do you keep it live? And like your project sounds like something that, with the support of folks being like, yes, we're doing this, like generative forward, it could have thrived. But because it didn't have that, and that's what I think is actually that mutual respect and also sort of way of working needs to be there at the get-go in order for something to really be generative for all folks involved.
Right, but because I was sort of shaking them, well, we were shaking each other down. We were shaking each other down because they were like, like they were trying to get this thing from me, and I kind of knew that. So then I was like, okay, well then I want. That's maybe not the best foundation.
I think the other thing that we all need to be more honest about is that this also it's a transactional system, but also that the work that we all do is a lot rooted in personal relationships, and we traffic in those personal relationships for a variety of different reasons, because our institutions don't have enough money, or because we need someone to do a favor, or because we know this person because we've spent time engaging with them, that then we can bring them into the fold. And that all is like labor and time and energy too, that like I think sometimes doesn't get discussed much externally.
No, right. No, I'm sorry, Nicole, go, sorry.
I was just going to add one additional layer, and Courtney, I appreciated that you kind of took it to the germ of the relationship and understanding, if we have shared values, or what our shared values are. And I process it as, what are the tension points that happen when changes come to you that you realize you don't have the capacity to support. So one of the things that Courtney shared that I completely agree with is like, do you have the capacity for experimentation? Is it just a word that you use, or are you actually willing to be present with all of the things that come with experimentation? But on the practical end, do you have the staff that can support what people will need in order to make your like the experience, Sam, that you were designing, it needs a lot of support to have it. I love that you said, you know, keep it alive, to keep it going. Not just the like materiality of it, is making sure like things are stocked and we understand where's the boundaries to keep things tidy and clean. I'm getting very particular right now, but like, but also like how to set it up in terms of like why this is worth, why, like if I am working with a visitor, like why should you do this? And here's how I can help you get involved in doing this. And so MOCA before COVID had learning lab spaces that were about experimenting with and making personal meaning from the ideas that were presented in the exhibition space. And so they were these generative spaces. And there was always a moment where they became kind of unruly, and I loved it. I thought it was gleeful calamity, and I thought it was great, but they were messy and kind of unhinged in a way, especially like towards the end of the exhibition. And I don't think everyone felt comfortable with it, but it also is about sharing authorship. So are we comfortable with the thing that visitors want the most, which is, how do I get my artwork here? How do I leave my mark in this space that's meant to be a temple? And how am I also seen as special? So not everyone or all museums are comfortable sharing the stage, if you will.
Right. Well, I'm really actually glad that I told that story. And I want to make it clear, I wasn't telling you guys the story to be vindicated, you know, although that would be lovely. But like I really was looking for honest feedback, and I really appreciate both of you for giving me really honest feedback. And I think it's also a cool thing to talk about because it brings up something really interesting, which is when there are efforts at engagement across strata of the cultural world, right? Because I didn't come up with this idea to undermine the museum. Do you know what I mean? The situation that I found myself in, running a venue, I was running a different venue at the time called Transpicos, and I was running a venue that was known for having like the livest, most right now shit in New York. Do you know what I mean? It was like, we're finger on the pulse. It's like, it happens at our club and then you read about it. Do you know what I mean? Not the other way around. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like that was like our game, like street level, people would get in our ears and be like, this is what's up, and we would make it happen. And like, that was like our brand or whatever, for lack of a better word, right? So I then suddenly had this floor space on, you know, in this museum. And so I, as helming a culture establishment like the one that I was helming, I had to be very careful not to be like, and now we're music, and now we're history. Now we are presenting the great works of the aughts, you know, behold. Do you know what I mean? Like, I needed to be like, no, I have to do something that's on message for my institution, you know, which is of course much less handsomely funded and so forth. But like, so I had to think of a way that resisted that kind of quality of calcification that can be assumed in a museum or gallery setting. Do you know what I mean? And the way that I thought of doing that was to like harness the space of the museum as a workshop rather than as a means of presentation, and then make that workshop available in this really democratic way to whoever happened to come. And also we channeled a lot of our own community like liaisons and connections and stuff into those generative nodes of activity, right? And it was really like authentically essentially like me solving a problem, which is like, how does a venue like mine do something in a museum without betraying its values? Do you follow what I mean?
Yeah.
And
yeah, it makes.
And then I discovered that ran into extreme contradistinction to, you know, the stated mission of the people that I was working with, which was actually regrettable because we were having actually a fairly lovely time of things until this happened. But it's interesting because it brings up this thing where there can be this like competing subjectivities or like competing value systems, you know, that make it difficult for these kinds of liaisons across strata of the cultural sphere to function.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it has to do with scale too. And at least in my personal experience, the larger you scale up, the harder it is to adapt and be flexible and change constantly, because the structures and systems are in place and people are either comfortable with them or use them as a way to sort of like maneuver themselves, and it creates like a much bigger ripple effect. Like a long time ago, I was the curator at Art in General in New York, and I did this amazing project with Child that was a performance, like a film installation and a performance, but they wanted the performance to have, like, everyone had to be seated for it to start, and it had to start at a specific time. And basically it needed to function like a theater, like, you know, where you like seat everyone, the lights go off, like you can't enter, like they close the doors, like, and I was like, we're like a gallery space that like doesn't function, like anyone can come in. And they were like, we need it to function like this. And so we had to change the entire mode of operation for their show, where we were like, you are in, and if you are not in, like, you do not get to see this performance. Like, and it was like, but it took a lot of, we were only 6 people who worked there. So between the 6 of us and our board, we were like, okay, this is what we're doing, radically changing our entire structure, and also all learning how to work at a theater for the next 3 months and then going back to something else. But it was possible because there are only so many of us that we could sit down and break that down together. And I think the larger you scale up, the harder, and the more you're met with resistance, honestly, often to that, for a variety of different reasons, I think.
Well, I really relate, interestingly. One way in which I like absolutely relate is about this capacity for experimentation. Because something that like in the first year and a half of running the space that I presently run, we kind of advertised it as like modular. Like you could move bits of the stage around and you could perform here or perform there or perform in the round or like blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? Decorate and do all of these things. And as time went on, it just became like more and more things. It was like, no, you can't move that. Nope, leave that there. We really realized like this, like you can experiment, but we can't experiment. Do you know what I mean? Like, you can do anything you want, but we need to do the same thing every night, or else we aren't going to do a good job supporting you because we don't know what you're doing. Do you know what I mean? And like that aspect of it, I absolutely relate to. Anyhow, super glad I told you that story. So this is my last inquiry of the night, but then maybe you guys have stuff and we won't run out of time on this Zoom. So back to the matter of value. I thought that the responses in terms of like the responses to value in terms of engagement and participation were super on point and really interesting. But then there's another thing about value that I have that's more in like a programming dimension, which is something that I think the art world, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is just me surmising and riffing, right? I imagine that the art world must be in a kind of unusual predicament right now, because there is this very admirable push, which I completely support, for all areas of the cultural sphere to be more inclusive and to reach out further and to incorporate more voices and to be multivocal and you know what I mean, include everybody, right? And the art world has these millions of pieces of art lying around that are worth giant amounts of money that organizations like y'all's has to like be the custodian of and so forth. And so there's this very, very sharp upturn in the need to be more inclusive, right? And at the same time, you can't just turn out Saul Lewitz. You know what I mean? It's like, that's like a process. You know what I'm saying? Like, so it's hard to be agile, right? Like for music, like I remember I can chart out in my recollection in Brooklyn, like from 2010 to 2020, the idea of booking a musical lineup, and not having a gender blind spot and not having a race blind spot super important work, seemed to be hard for certain people. Certain communities still haven't really like picked it up. But once you pick it up, it's not that hard to do. You just hire different people. You know what I mean? And but that seems like a more challenging predicament for the art world.
Yeah, I would say it's a kind of or it's intersectional in the ways it's being, or it's not, it's happening in fragments, and it's not a holistic thought process, because I think it's not just about the program. So I think this is actually maybe the problem, is that institutions are articulating that they have, or showing that they have, a very diverse race, gender, ethnicity, age range, medium program, but the institution that is creating the program is in no way reflective of that. Or the institution creating a program that is, wonderfully diverse, isn't connected to is not reflective of the demographic of their constituents that they serve, and so therefore isn't connecting to maybe the sort of like values of the different communities that are also coming to the museum space as like a space to gather and to find an encounter with art. So there's like a disconnection that's happening there. So I think now it seems like, particularly this year, there's a sort of reckoning with the structure and the legacy of colonialism and white supremacy that the institution operates, and a way of trying to think about what inclusive and accessibility looks like, and value from an internal perspective. Not saying that there still doesn't need to be work done in the program areas. There are lots of institutions that should be doing better, and some that are doing amazing programming. But I think until those things are intersecting, it needs more, basically, is what I'm gonna say for that one. And I think it's hard too, because we keep sort of dancing around that the art world is also a luxury good. It's tied to the act of, like, the art market, even though the museum says it's divorced from it isn't. Like, the people who buy that art support the institution. The work goes up in value by being shown in our institution. Like, we get lobbied by people to show work, and it's like, it's all interconnected in that sort of way. And I think peeling back those layers and trying to understand, like, who's making decisions with who in mind, who's speaking for who and why, and asking those questions and being sort of more honest with ourselves about what we're doing and why, is only going to help us move forward.
Mm-hmm. So related question, we are running out of time. So this, I think we're good. We'll wrap it up here. But like, but related question, this is kind of a sidebar. Do you think that this is a question in general? I think this is a question for all areas of culture. But since I'm talking to people who work in the art world, do you think that the art world has the capacity to create new figures at the scale of Jackson Pollock or so? These people who will become like paradigmatic and like practically household names, right? Because the art world, we know, can create people whose work sells for a lot of money, right? Yeah. But is there work on the horizon that's like capturing the zeitgeist and going to become of just this kind of general social importance to people? Like,
I'm gonna say yes. I think it's already happening, but I think that we won't necessarily be alive to know if we were right. I mean, I look at like issues of Art Forum and art magazines and all of the ads that were like for the shows that were selling. Like, I don't know half of those artists too. Like not everyone makes it through in the narrative or story of art history that is being told to us, which is also currently being rewritten and like looked at from different angles, which is amazing. But I think you have to believe that there are, like, I mean, I would name the people, there are people I could name that I like hope in 50 years or 100 years when I'm gone, people are like, oh my God, Chris O'Feely, amazing. Like, but like.
It's on my mug.
but I think I have to believe that to do that, because my lucky job in this is that I get to work with people to help them make something that might be a contender in a narrative that someone else will write around that. So like, I don't know, I have to believe in it, I think.
Cool. Nicole, what do you think?
And well, I mean, I have to kind of just do a plug for the work that I do and why I choose to be an educator, which is if museums or spaces that host artists make an investment in the people who want to be with art, that I think is how you get into not just people's minds, but in people's hearts. And so I know I made a joke about artwork on a mug, but I mean, the number of artists that I hear, people who say they don't even like art, that they do know about, I mean, it gets seeped into our collective consciousness. And so if we can do better jobs of connecting people to art experiences and setting them up with not just the confidence, but also the like, here are kind of like 3 ways to go about interpreting a work of art that's new to you, and people can own that. I think then, I mean, I wholeheartedly agree with Courtney, and it's the work that we do to connect people with art and the ways that artists think and work, and the questions that they ask that will sink in with people's consciousness, I think.
Amazing. Well, that's a really great note to end on. Super positive, super optimistic. Appreciate that. That's good. But guys, it's been super amazing talking to you, and thanks for dealing with the technical snafus.
No, thanks for having us, Sam. I'm glad that we can bring some optimism from Cleveland and share it out on the cast.
Yeah, we need it here in New York, I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, super amazing, such an interesting conversation, and we'll be in touch soon.
All right,
Awesome.
bye.
Bye,
Thank you so much.
everyone. Thank
Okay,
you.
bye. All right. Okay, a few technical difficulties, but fascinating conversation nonetheless. Courtney, Finn, Nicole. I'm going to forget her last name. Holy smokes. Nicole, you know what? I'm going to say it right. Here we go. This is terribly embarrassing, but better to be correct and embarrassed than to be disrespectful and whack. But really, really deep conversation. I mean, I don't know, man. Maybe the Midwest is the place to be because those folks seem like they're in a good mood. Nicole Ledinek. Yeah, that was deep to hear about that, man. Like methods of engagement. When I was out at the museum, Cleveland MOCA, I was approached by somebody working in the museum. I was just kind of standing around waiting to meet with Courtney, and I was approached, and it was actually a really inviting, nice experience. The person was super cool, very knowledgeable, and I thought it was really interesting to hear about how that's not this like compartmentalized thing where they have this group of people that just stand around the museum, but in fact everybody in the museum is trained to do that and to engage in that way. So good on them for that. Yeah, so this is the last episode of the first series of Place of Assembly. If you've been watching or if you've watched more than one of these, thanks for checking it out. You're dope. I'm going to bring my closing music up here. We've been listening to Art Jam from the Quantum Natives label based out of Taipei. We had that great episode with Alan Huang from Taipei. It was dope. So here we go, bringing up Art Jam. Boy, technical failures left and right tonight, but y'all don't care. All right, I'm Sam Hillmer. This is Place of Assembly, produced by Hollow and Experimental Sound Studio Chicago, 8-Ball Radio. Thanks for checking it out. Oh, yeah, you know what? Before we go, we're going to be back next series, which is going to start in March. And during the next series, we're going to be doing 3 deep dives on specific places on Earth. And each of these things, it's going to be a series called Nodes. And each Nodes series will be a 3-part mini-series within the broader series. And we're going to be looking at the Hudson Arts corridor between Hudson, New York, and Massachusetts, and China 3 episodes on venues and cultural presenters and spaces in China. And then we're going to be doing 3 episodes on people doing cultural organization and running spaces in the Slavic countries in Eastern Europe, as well as some one-offs with some other cool people. Michelle Luke is coming on the program. We're doing an episode called Is the Internet a Real Place? So it's going to be dope, but we're going to take a month off, and we'll be back. Hit us on the Patreon, patreon.hollow/NYC. And all right, I'm going to shut up. Art John, that's it. See y'all in March.